Yes, sir. Good morning, dear colleagues. Good morning. We're about to start our meeting. Please take your seats. I'd like to remind you that our meeting is being recorded and streamed live on our website. You got any people to hear this? Should we wait? Just keep rolling. Good morning, dear colleagues. Again, we're about to start our meeting. I would remind you that our meeting is being recorded and streamed live on our website. Please note that as announced by the table office and in line with Rule 27.2, only members who have entered their names on the speakers list no later than 1 hour before the opening of our committee meeting will be given the floor. Thank you for your cooperation. Due to time constraints and the large interest in speakers, I would kindly ask to limit your interventions to 2 minutes. Again, let me repeat, we're holding a 2-minute time limit on interventions today. We may need to shorten this time depending on how our meeting progresses. Please pay attention to the timer, which is visible on the screen. Dear colleagues, I call the General Committee on Political Affairs and Security to order. Our first order of business is to adopt the agenda for today's meeting. The draft agenda of this meeting was circulated to all delegations in advance. Since the Secretariat has not received any comments on the agenda, I will assume there are no objections to its adoption. Thank you. The agenda is adopted. Colleagues, I do not want to waste any time with the usual diplomatic niceties and suggest this meeting is anything like business as usual. It's anything but. 1 year ago at this very meeting, I warned that Russia's actions could have tremendous consequences for the security and safety of the citizens we all represent as parliamentarians, possibly for generations to come. I do not need to remind anyone in this room that this is exactly what has happened. On February 24th of 2022, Russia launched a full-scale and unprovoked invasion against Ukraine, a war of choice that continues to this day. This war has cost hundreds of thousands of lives and upended the lives of millions. It was launched by Russia in direct contravention of all the principles of the Helsinki Final Act, the very principles which underpin this assembly. I believe the best use of our time together today is to explore how we as parliamentarians can maximize our support to Ukraine as it seeks only to defend itself and end the atrocities perpetrated on a daily basis against even its most vulnerable citizens. I also believe we can usefully explore how our support can best be focused and magnified through the OSCE to lend assistance where it is most needed. I'm grateful to our speakers today from the governmental side of the OSCE who will brief us on their efforts towards that noble end. Colleagues, I know that most of us here will keep these objectives firmly in mind for today's discussions. I've always described my role as chairman as helping ensure that all legitimate voices are represented in our dialogue. However, I remind you again, as I have in the past, that I believe our dialogue here must always be based on the promotion of the fundamental values and principles that all our nations signed up to in the Helsinki Final Act. These principles are the basis of peace and security in our region. I have no doubt that the main outcome of today's meeting, despite whatever might be said today by a small minority, will be a strong demonstration of unity in support of the people of Ukraine, and indeed in support of the rules-based international order on which our collective security rests. Let me be clear. I will not tolerate disruptions intended to create a circus of this event. But even if they do occur, they will not in any way detract from what we all know to be true. As we have agreed time and again in our declarations, we stand united in support of Ukraine and in condemnation of Russia's aggression. Everyone here should know that this support is strong, is genuine, and will endure as long as necessary to see a free, sovereign, independent, and thriving Ukraine with full accountability for the aggressors. Look forward to hearing from the various OSCE officials before us today. And in particular, I'm eager to hear them describe to us how the OSCE will best be mobilized today, tomorrow, and until this war ends in support of the needs of the Ukrainian people. I'm very pleased to introduce the new chairperson of the Security Committee of the OSCE Permanent Council and permanent representative of Romania to the OSCE. Stoyan, dear Ambassador, thank you very much for being here today with us at this meeting. We are certainly looking forward to hearing your presentation regarding the first dimension of our organization, in particular on the impact of Russia's war and stance at OSCE on the organization and its ability to effectively work on first dimension issues, in particular in support of Ukraine. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, distinguished parliamentarians. I would like to thank you for the invitation to address the members of the General Committee on Political Affairs and Security at this special debate. Romania is honored to have been entrusted by the OSCE Chairmanship North Macedonia with the mandate of chairing the Security Committee. As we are confronting with the greatest security and humanitarian crisis since the Second World War due to Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, we will spare no efforts in defending the OSCE principles and commitments. Let me emphasize that the fundamental principles and commitments of the OSCE, in particular the Helsinki Final Act, cannot be subject of negotiations or reinterpretation. They cannot be selectively implemented either. These principles cannot be properly safeguarded now unless Russia ends its war of aggression against Ukraine. Let me also commend the current and previous chairmanships for being guardians of our organization, as well as praise the firm stance of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly on Russia's assault against Ukraine, against our principles and values, and against this organization. The Birmingham Declaration last year is a proof in this regard. The current security crisis has wide, multifaceted security implications. It is overlapping and as such exacerbating other security and socio-economic challenges across the OSCE area. Strengthening our collective capacity to deal with these multiple and diverse security challenges is more important than ever, and we hope that the debates within the Security Committee this year under the chair of Romania will contribute to this aim. Moreover, Russia's war of aggression has severely impacted the work of our organizations because of its specificity, adding to the existing dysfunctionalities. And we need to recognize that there were problems that affected the activity of our organizations before Russia started the war of aggression against Ukraine too. However, the OSCE has managed to adapt and to continue to deliver to its participating states through the work of the OSCE field missions and autonomous institutions. Existing tools such as the Moscow mechanisms were used to document the violation of international humanitarian law and human rights law by the Russian Federation in Ukraine, with the aim of contributing to ensuring accountability. Other instruments needed to be established, like the support program for Ukraine, to respond to the request of Ukraine to benefit from support and expertise of the OSCE. The autonomous institutions have adapted their work to respond to the current security challenges while continuing to support all participating states. The meetings in Vienna of the Permanent Council and its subsidiary bodies, including the Security Committee, proved every single week an overwhelming support for Ukraine and displayed the isolation of Russia and Belarus. This is just a glimpse of how the OSCE has continued to work during these challenging times. We couldn't have continued with the business as usual approach, and this will last until Russia will end its war of aggression against Ukraine. Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, our work as committee chair will be rooted in the core mandate of the Security Committee, namely to contribute to strengthening security in the OSCE area by discussing non-military and political aspects of security, including the implementation of existing commitments and cross-dimensional issues, support the organization of the annual Security Review Conference, and make recommendations to the Permanent Council. At the Security Committee debates, we aim to addressing challenges, presenting lessons learned and good practices, while ensuring interaction between Security Committee and other international organizations, displaying a multi-stakeholder approach and mainstreaming gender. The OSCE chairmanship has highlighted for this year the following core thematic areas as priorities relevant for the Security Committee: combating non-conventional threats, cybersecurity, the role of the OSCE field missions, border security, as well as the importance of the women, peace and security agenda. In organizing these debates, we will thus be guided by these priorities. But as the overwhelming majority of the participating states have underscored in the first discussion within the Security Committee this year, we will shape our discussion in such a way to focus them on the consequences of Russia's war of aggression, while also paying due attention to other challenges in the OSCE area. Our next meetings will focus on topics such as inter alia, cybersecurity, transnational organized crime, border security and management, as well as police-related activities. For the upcoming meeting in the beginning of March, we intend to discuss how to strengthen the protection and resilience of critical infrastructure. But we intend to keep the Security Committee agenda flexible with a view to take into account the developments on the ground and the concerns of our public opinion. Our debates cannot take place in a vacuum. They must be connected to the reality if they want to be relevant. Ladies and gentlemen, in its capacity as chair of the Security Committee, Romania will also put an emphasis on the importance of a cross-dimensional approach to security. Jointly with Austria and Ireland, the co-chairs of the Economic and Environment Committee and the Human Dimension Committee, respectively, will aim at making the work of these informal subsidiary bodies of the OSCE Permanent Council complementary, as we need to pull together all the resources to face today's security challenges. We will also consider organizing joint committee meetings on topics such as combating trafficking in human beings. Let me assure you that Romania will strive to ensure that the work of the Security Committee will contribute to strengthening comprehensive security and defending the principles and values on which the OSCE is based. We count to the support of the participating states in fulfilling this mandate, but also on the support of the Assembly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ambassador, for outlining the important work of the OSCE Security Committee. Thank you for being with us today. We will now go on to agenda item 4 and hear the presentation of the chair of the OSCE Forum for Security Cooperation and the permanent representative of Bosnia and Herzegovina to the OSCE. Ambassador Siniša Bensun. Bosnia and Herzegovina took over the chairmanship of the forum in the beginning of the year. Ambassador, we look forward to hearing from you how FSC-related mechanisms and tools, such as the Vienna document, are relevant to Russia's war against Ukraine, and how you think the FSC and its related mechanisms can best be mobilized going forward. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
I thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, distinguished members of General Committee of Political Affairs and Security, as a chairperson of the Forum for Security and Cooperation, one of the OSCE 2 regular decision-making bodies, and my main platform for discussion on politico-military affairs in the OSCE area, it is my honor to inform the General Committee on Political Affairs and Security about the FSC activities and on how the FSC could best be used to address conflicts and wars in the OSCE region. As reported in the FSC chair's letter to the chairperson on 29th meeting of the OSCE Ministerial Council held in Lodz last December, in 2022, the OSCE has witnessed an unprecedented security situation and geopolitical tensions with the war against Ukraine launched on 24 February 2022. It brought a negative impact on the whole security architecture in Europe and beyond, jeopardized security and cooperation, the very essence of the organizations. End of quote. It is the right time to recall where we have come from and where we are now, as well as to try to reflect on the direction we want to take in the future, especially with regard to the preservation of our politico-military acquis. Over the last decades, the FSC has made significant contributions to comprehensive security in the OSCE area, such as the Vienna document, the Code of Conduct on politico-military aspects of security, the principles governing conventional arms transfers and non-proliferation, the framework for arms control, the OSCE documents on small arms and light weapons and stockpiles on conventional ammunition. They are still relevant today and support us, the participating states, in fulfilling the OSCE missions and mandate when implemented in letter and spirit. The security dialogues, which were not originally a constituent element of the FSC, have over the years enabled participating states to discuss various security-related aspects and shared concerns within the political-military domain. During our chairmanship, we are trying to maintain and preserve the dialogue in order to rebuild trust and contribute to overall shift from war to peace narrative. Mr. Chair, distinguished parliamentarians, unfortunately, in recent years, we have seen a deterioration of the arms control instruments and confidence and security building measures in the OSCE region. However, we should not forget that the creation of these instruments and measures were key and unique milestones designed to create a solid foundation of transparency, peace, and stability through a cooperative security in the OSCE area from Vancouver to Vladivostok. Over the years, the FSC has seen various attempts to increase the efficiency of our existing tools and mechanisms. Nevertheless, the success is determined by political will, constructive engagement, good faith, and the spirit of cooperative security. Three instruments in particular stand out, known as three pillars of conventional arms control architecture: the Treaty on Conventional Armed Forces in Europe, the Treaty on Open Skies, and the Vienna Document. All three constitute a cornerstone of military stability, predictability, and transparency in the OSCE region. Unfortunately, the deterioration of the security architecture in Europe has also affected these instruments. It is not my place to elaborate on this deterioration. On the other hand, it is my role as FSC chair to inform you about the use of certain of these instruments. I will concentrate on the Vienna document, if only because it is a politically binding document involving all 57 participating states. The Vienna document adopted in 1990 initially covered the annual exchange of military information, including current and projected military budgets, established the annual implementation assessment meeting, set up the OSCE communication network for transfer of CSPM's information, increased military contacts, and allowed each state to inspect any other. It is also established a risk reduction mechanisms to help deal with the questions about unusual military activity and so-called hazardous incidents of a military nature. Over the years, the document has been expanded and adapted as good as possible to geopolitical and security developments. The latest amendment was made in 2013, but the document has not been reissued since 2011. Despite all difficulties, it must be acknowledged that the OSCE participating states have during a certain amount of time achieved something extraordinary with the Vienna document. The practical implementation of the Vienna document by participating states has been a frequent topic of discussion in the FSC. In April 2021 and twice in February 2022, the Vienna document 2011, Chapter 3 on the risk reduction mechanisms for consultation and cooperation as regards unusual military activities was invoked by Ukraine and Lithuania, also on behalf of Latvia and Estonia, to discuss security concerns. It was linked to the holding of military exercises and massing a large number of military equipment and troops by Russian Federation and Belarus near the border of participating states, in particular Ukraine. Following consultations to discuss the matters giving rise to concern, special joint meetings of the Permanent Council and the FSC were convened, during which the situation was assessed. The delegations in attendance focused on providing recommendations to stabilize the situation and halt activities giving rise to concern. It is a fact that the use of Chapter 3 on the risk reduction mechanisms did not escalate tensions, however, provided clear signals on unwillingness to engage. A few days after the last special joint FSC-PC meeting, a war started in Ukraine. Mr. Chair, distinguished parliamentarians, what I can tell you about the possible way ahead. Despite a difficult climate, unprecedented security situation, and the geopolitical tensions, the Forum for Security Cooperation and the arms control instruments and confidence and security building measures in the OSCE region continue to play an important role and will continue to do so in the future. The work on the OSCE assistance projects on SALT and stockpiles on conventional ammunition continues. The OSCE currently manages a portfolio of approximately 20 assistance projects throughout the OSCE region. The OSCE Code of Conduct on political-military aspects of security remains an undisputed normative cornerstone document of the OSCE, recalling and setting clear commitments. The code sets out both interstate and intrastate norms for political military conduct and reminds participating states to observe international humanitarian law and the law on armed conflicts. With regard to other confidence-building measures, the Vienna document, if properly used, provides a toolbox of confidence and security-building measures aimed at increasing transparency among participating states for building trust and dispelling concerns. It was designed to be a valuable normative asset not only for early warning, but also for conflict prevention. Risk reduction mechanisms, verification activities, regional measures, and other CSBMs enshrined in this unique document continue to bear a clear potential for re-establishing transparency in a post-conflict environment, thereby rebuilding trust and confidence and preventing new tensions. In this context, I appeal to strive for consensus for holding of this year's annual implementation assessment meeting. In my view, such an important technical platform for dialogue should be kept open and discussions of existing mechanisms and instruments should be pursued as long as they are in place. To safeguard the OSCE relevance in the future, its capacity to act must be maintained and strengthened. The organization's inclusive character must be preserved. As it's stated every week in the FSC, at present, it is difficult, if not impossible, to talk about the trust, openness, and transparency in the political military sphere of the OSCE. The war in Ukraine, as well as other former or still ongoing conflicts in the OSCE region, show that functioning and effectiveness of the OSCE instrument deepened largely on the concept of cooperative security, the willingness and good faith of all participating states. The forum will continue to serve to participating states for dialogue on developments on matters of political military importance, a venue for raising security concerns and platform for keeping each other accountable. Our acquis must be preserved, and though some may not necessarily agree, the few channels left for dialogue must be kept open. The FSC needs to prevail in order to contribute to post-conflict rehabilitation, peace-building efforts, and contribution to the conflict cycle toolbox, but also to explore ways for their further operationalization and enhancement. Finally, FSC should contribute to urgent shift from the current war rhetoric to talking about the peace and give diplomacy a final chance. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your presentation. Our next speaker is Ambassador Kairat Abdrahmanov, OSCE High Commissioner on National Minorities. Ambassador, we're fortunate to have you as a regular guest. There you are. We're fortunate to have you as a regular guest of our committee, and we're grateful that you're here to discuss your crucial mandate with us once again. As you know, history has proven repeatedly how national minorities are too often the most vulnerable victims of conflicts worldwide. I look forward to hearing from you how you see the role of the High Commissioner in the context of Russia's war against Ukraine and how best we can collectively support your crucial work. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Honorable Chairperson of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly's Committee on Political Affairs and Security, Congressman Richard Hudson, distinguished friends and colleagues, Chairperson of the Security Committee of the OSCE Permanent Council, Ambassador Stelian Stoyan, distinguished Chairperson of the Forum for Security Cooperation, Ambassador Sinisha Bensun, distinguished Director of the OSCE Conflict Prevention Center, Ambassador Tula Yuriola, distinguished members and observers of the Parliamentary Assembly. Thank you for your invitation to today's meeting of the General Committee. I have the honor to address you, distinguished members of the committee, for the third time since I took up my mandate. In every one of my addresses to you, I have underscored the importance of the role that you play and the influence you can exert as a group and as a delegation in relations to your own governments. I have also reminded you about the instrumental role that OSCE Parliamentary Assembly played in convening the only OSCE summit in the 21st century. I recall that participating states signed the Astana Commemorative Declaration in 2010, where all of the participating states committed to uphold the vision of a free, democratic, common and indivisible Euro-Atlantic and Eurasian security community rooted in agreed principles, shared commitments, and common goals. That was a remarkable display of unity, which should have guided our cooperation going forward. 12 years ago, thanks to the united efforts of the OEC participating states, governments, and civil society, there was a sense of real hope to uphold the above-mentioned commitments. Unfortunately, we failed to deliver. Nevertheless, I am convinced that there is a way forward. The meetings that I held during my official visits, including my most recent visits this year, including to the participating states to the west of Vienna, meetings with representatives of your governments, civil society, national parliaments, and national minorities speak to this possibility. As you know, my mandate is to provide early warning and early action to prevent tensions involving national minority issues from developing into conflict. I engage in quiet diplomacy and provide tailored expertise to the 57 OEC participating states to support their efforts to develop and implement policies that facilitate the integration of their diverse societies. Indeed, in my experience and that of former high commissioners, promoting policies and laws that facilitate integration through inclusion and respect for diversity is one of the most effective tools to prevent conflicts. Given the dramatic challenges that Ukraine and the region have faced in the past year, I appreciate the opportunity for sobering, honest dialogue on how we as the OECE can further mobilize our resources to help end the ongoing war against Ukraine. Today, I will not resort to the use of military terms, which unfortunately tends to dominate the speeches of not only political analysts and experts, but also of politicians and diplomats. Rather, I will use more familiar recommendations on how to avoid wars and conflicts. In line with my institution's Bolzano-Boston recommendations on national minorities in interstate relations, I acknowledge that states may have a legitimate interest to support persons belonging to national minorities residing in other states based on ethnic, cultural, linguistic, religious, historical, or other ties. However, there is a risk that legitimate support could infringe on the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the country where the minority resides. The Bolzano-Boston recommendations aim to help states avoid the risk of minority issues being manipulated, instrumentalized for political reasons, internationalized, or even leading to cross-border conflicts. This is, as we have unfortunately seen, a realistic scenario. I therefore appeal to you, dear members of the Parliamentary Assembly, to be wary of the consequences of instrumentalization of minority issues and to engage in your respective countries in legislative processes that will unite, rather divide societies at this very delicate point of time. Many of the issues of contention among participating states are technical in nature and can be resolved through bilateral engagement with kin states as well as inclusive dialogue with the minority communities. In this regard, my office can offer concrete contributions. The OEC region has a wealth of successful examples of bilateral mechanisms of dialogue, which I would be willing to bring to light and promote among other participating states. In parallel, through the HCNM's guidelines and recommendations, including the above-mentioned Bolzano-Boston one, which have been developed over the past 3 decades, my institution continues to be well placed to provide advice to the participating states on how they can concretely strengthen the integration and resilience of their diverse societies in number of policy areas in order to prevent crises and conflicts or to avoid a resurgence thereof. However, please be aware that there are no one-size-fits-all ready-made solutions. Solutions are contextual. That is why in our joint work with the participating states, I particularly value our cooperation not only with policymakers, but also with the civil society and members of the community, which can help contextualize the advice to specific needs. This type of support will hopefully soon be particularly relevant in the context of post-war recovery of Ukraine and in Ukraine. That is why, in addition to closely monitoring the impact of the war on minority communities in Ukraine, including in the territories of Ukraine under the effective control of the Russian Federation, which forms the basis for my ongoing engagement with the parties, my office's work continues in other key areas as well. In particular, supporting efforts to strengthen the institutional and legislative framework governing minority rights and issues in Ukraine is a priority. I appreciate my open channels of communication with Ukraine's authorities to this effect. I also note my continued engagement with the Russian Federation on issues pertaining to my mandate. Issues that include specific aspects of conscription campaigns and their impact on national minorities, as well as the ability of people to maintain core aspects of their identity, especially in the areas of education and cultural expression. Special attention has also been given to the situation of Crimean Tatars. At the same time, as I mentioned in my PC statement back in July, I have taken note of reported instances of hate speech directed against national minorities, including Russian-speaking individuals and communities. I have called on all participating states to increase their efforts to monitor, prevent, and combat such tendencies, and to refrain from policies that may ultimately result in decreasing space for national minorities. Distinguished members of the Parliamentary Assembly, let me underscore that in any war and conflict, minorities suffer most of all. And unfortunately, this applies to the situation at hand. In modern wars and conflicts, and this becomes clear from the example of ongoing hostilities in the world, there can be no winners. As a result of military clashes, it is primarily the civilian population that suffers. Moreover, as significant decreases in the socio-economic well-being of the population due to external economic factors exacerbates the lives of ordinary people, including national minorities. Therefore, I reiterate my call to cease all hostilities and return to negotiations where we will be able to play our role also in Ukraine. In particular, some policy areas have proven to be key to building inclusive, cohesive, resilient societies will likely feature in future peace negotiations between Ukraine and the Russian Federation. I recall that early attempts at bilateral talks last year addressed the issues of minority languages, including in education, an area in which my office has over time accumulated valuable expertise. If relevant, I would be willing to make this wealth of knowledge and practical experience available to all parties concerned in order to further complement the peacemaking efforts of the OEC and the wider international community. As I mentioned during my previous address to you, since I took up my mandate, I had an opportunity to conduct several visits to both Ukraine and the Russian Federation. I am ready to build on the good relationships developed on those occasions and offer my contribution towards the resolution of the conflict from the perspective of my mandate, should prospects to engage in dialogue emerge. As I address you, distinguished parliamentarians, I recognize that you must protect and promote the interests of your constituencies. At the same time, I want to emphasize that your constituencies include members of national minorities. That is why it is important to ensure that in your legislative work, you take into account the interests of all, including national minorities. In this regard, displaying tolerance, refraining from inflammatory rhetorics, supporting pluralism of opinion, and engaging in a constructive dialogue between people is of paramount importance to attaining sustainable security. Recalling the motto of the OEC chairpersonship of North Macedonia, let me remind ourselves that we are not talking about abstract principles, but rather it's all about people. People's safety, peace, and prosperity is the ultimate goal. Meeting the needs of all people by taking into account their specific ethnicity, language, religion, gender, and other identity markers is one of the tools we have at our disposal to achieve that goal and maintain it over time. That is where the High Commissioner's unique mandate of conflict prevention in relation to minority issues can add expertise and value. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Ambassador. Our next speaker is Ambassador Tuula Uriola, Director of the OSCE Conflict Prevention Center. Ambassador, thank you for your important work in addressing the growing security challenges in our region, especially in the context of Russia's war against Ukraine. I look forward to your views on how we can best, through the OSCE, support the needs of the Ukrainian people. Madam Director, the floor is yours.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Distinguished parliamentarians and fellow panelists as well. As you will be reflecting on in your debate rather, on how the OSCE can contribute to address the consequences of the war, I will be looking into the matter from the OSCE Secretariat's perspective, and in particular from the perspective of the Conflict Prevention Center. Now, we've all been witnesses to already 1 year of Russia's war against Ukraine, but before moving on to some of the concrete implications of this war on the OSCE's work in and on Ukraine, I take the opportunity to remind us all of the far-reaching consequences of this war on the wider OSCE region, because the war affects our societies across the OSCE region and globally. The socio-economic consequences can themselves have far-reaching consequences in the form of increased instability or unpredictability of political climates in our area. And this means that in the OSCE, we must pay even closer attention to a host of issues threatening security across the 3 dimensions of security. From risks of environmental disasters and the socio-economic impact caused by the war, to countering the spread of small arms and light weapons, to combating trafficking in human beings, or to ensuring that women who have been subjected to gender-based violence receive support. The list is long. And this also means keeping an ever closer eye on potential crises emerging as a consequence of the war, which might require early warning or early action on our part. And in this context, I'd like to thank the Parliamentary Assembly's Vienna office, which actively contributes on early warning regional developments and policy issues. I must say we have frequent constructive cooperation, and let me still add that the contribution of the Parliamentary Assembly and in this particular case, colleagues here in Vienna, is really valuable and very much appreciated on our side. Now, there is, of course, for the participating states and the organization alike, also the big question of European security architecture, the foundations of which the major war in our midst has shaken. But I will focus my intervention now on 2 main elements. First of all, how the OSCE has, since 2014, responded to the unfolding crisis in Ukraine, and the flexible modalities that we've developed to make our continued engagement in Ukraine possible upon requests from a considerable number of our participating states. You will recall that in 2014, the OSCE was able to speedily respond by deploying this special monitoring mission, the SMM, and later in that summer, the observer mission at the Donetsk and Gukovo border crossing points. Our organization at the time was able to act together to utilize our unique and flexible toolbox to address the challenges of a fast developing crisis. And the SMM developed and grew according to the needs on the ground, providing indispensable monitoring as well as, and importantly, helping the people in the conflict affected areas. And the OSCE was, of course, also engaged in negotiating efforts in the trilateral contact group, focusing on the security, political, humanitarian, and economic aspects of the conflict. But let's recall also that the OSCE had already been delivering in Ukraine since the 1990s, contributing to the safety and stability of the country. But after Russia launched the war against Ukraine on the 24th of February 1 year ago, we all know that consensus was not found to continue the mandate of the SMM, and in fact, some months later, the Office of the Project Coordinator in Ukraine was also forced to close. But under the direction of the Secretary General and in close cooperation with other relevant OSCE actors, we supported then evacuation and relocation operations between late February and early March last year. And these operations were carried out under exceptionally challenging circumstances. Given the strong wish of a great number of our participating states for the OSCE to continue to support Ukraine and its people, we then looked into how we could continue our engagement. Just weeks after the war began, the project coordinator developed an extra budgetary project, so based on voluntary contributions, to provide support for the immediate humanitarian needs to our longstanding partners and the vulnerable members of the population in Ukraine. And so we procured emergency items for our partners to help the ministries, the public agencies, but also local communities to continue to operate in their very challenging conditions. And other immediate needs were identified as well. But bearing in mind that the OSCE is not a humanitarian organization, I think it was the very least we could do given the circumstances at the time. If you think about it, all in all, nearly 30 years in total of OSCE at work in Ukraine, mandated by the participating states to support the country in meeting OSCE commitments and obligations. And so that is why it has been important to find new ways to continue to support Ukraine and its people under the current very difficult circumstances. And with no consensus on the continuation of the project coordinator's mandate, this really, we felt, and the participating states who encouraged us on this, felt that this really could not go to waste. The hundreds of projects that had been implemented over the years, these also represented valuable partnerships with the civil society, with the institutions of Ukraine, with media, with academia, but also with other international organizations. And of course, partnerships within the OSCE itself, with the institutions, with you, the Parliamentary Assembly, and not least with the participating states. So last year, on the 1st of November, the OSCE officially launched the support program for Ukraine, the SPU. It has required innovative approaches and a certain amount of out-of-the-box thinking, that I can tell you. And I am thankful to all who have enabled this, really thankful for their efforts and flexibility. And I'm especially grateful to our national staff in Ukraine, who continue working under extremely challenging circumstances. The SPU is fully funded by donors. It addresses the most urgent needs and continues to provide much needed assistance to our longstanding partners in Ukraine. The SPU is also multidimensional. It ranges from assistance to humanitarian demining, to looking into the environmental damage caused by the war, to providing social and psychological support to those affected by the war, as well as supporting media freedom, the countering of cybercrime, and combating trafficking in human beings. Now, this last topic is really a crucial one. Millions of people have been forced from their homes since the war began, and more than 8 million have fled Ukraine, most of them women and children, and they are at significant risk of becoming victims of human trafficking. So the OSCE has developed clear policy recommendations and works closely with Ukraine's neighbors to protect the most vulnerable. What unites all these projects is the focus on supporting Ukrainian institutions, civil society, and the people to deal with a wide variety of challenges the country is facing, all the while building and strengthening their resilience. The chair has appointed a special representative, project coordinator, Ambassador Vilidsen, in order to ensure an optimal effectiveness of SPU's work in Ukraine. But I would also like to underline that a number of activities never stopped. We continue to provide equipment and material support, as well as training to various national agencies in the field of explosive ordnance disposal and detection of illicit small arms and light weapons. And this is really because I need not remind you of how important it is also to ensure, in addition to everything else, and in the context really of any conflict, that we do our utmost to prevent the spread of weapons. You will later hear today from the coordinator on economic and environmental affairs, Ambassador Hassani, of other areas that also demand our urgent attention and which we are addressing. Efforts have been redoubled to provide targeted activities also to Ukrainian women in and outside of Ukraine. Support of women's leadership is a strong focus of our Secretary General. And let me also mention survivors of gender-based violence, which is an important one. And I do think that there is more that the OSCE can do and should, but for much of what more we could do and could be done, the participating states need to find the political will and consensus to act. Let's remember that in 2014, we proved that the organization can respond rapidly and flexibly, and the OSCE's wealth of knowledge and experience proves or rather provides a trove of information and approaches and mechanisms that we can further explore and leverage. The OSCE Parliamentary Assembly and you as individual parliamentarians can support this aim by bringing more visibility to the organization's actions and activities, and by promoting opportunities for our engagement in support of Ukraine, but also elsewhere in our common region, which is being affected by the war, in addition to other existing or emerging drivers of conflict or instability or crisis. So before closing, I would just like to remind us all of the 3 OSCE staff members who remain illegally and unjustifiably detained in temporarily occupied areas of Ukraine. This is a situation that is unacceptable, and I call for their immediate and unconditional release. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for this comprehensive overview of your great work. Appreciate you being with us again. Colleagues, regarding item 7 on our agenda, the Secretariat has notified me that the rapporteur is not present today, and therefore will not be able to hear from him. We therefore move on to agenda item 8, our special debate. I look forward to hearing your views and the presentations you've heard about the presentation you've heard today and on the issues before this committee. Again, I see a very large number of committee members have signed up to speak. We have very limited time and we want to hear from everyone. And so speaking time, as I mentioned at the outset, will be limited to 2 minutes. And everyone can see the big green disc on the wall here. And so I would just ask you to please respect those time limits so that all of our colleagues will have an opportunity to intervene, or certainly as many as possible. I will now call on our first speaker from Germany, Dr. Daniela de Ritter. You're recognized for 2 minutes.
Ja, ganz herzlichen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender. Ganz herzlichen Dank auch an die Expertinnen hier auf dem Podium. Vor einem Jahr hat Russland seinen illegitimen Krieg gegen die Ukraine begonnen und damit die europäische Friedensordnung schwer beschädigt. Für die Ukrainerinnen heißt das tagtäglich, und Sie haben das jetzt eindrücklich geschildert, Furcht vor russischen Angriffen, Sorge und Trauer um die Liebsten und Sorge auch um das eigene Überleben. Und Ihre Beiträge haben deutlich gemacht, dass die gezielte Zerstörung der Infrastrukturen auch dazu führen soll, insbesondere die Zivilbevölkerung zu quälen und zu zermürben. Ja, es ist ganz wichtig, dass wir daran erinnern, dass Kindesentführungen, Vergewaltigungen und sexualisierte Gewalt, Misshandlungen und Folter an der Tagesordnung sind. Und deshalb ist es wichtig, dass die OSZE und ihre Parlamentarierversammlung fortbesteht. Wir sollten schon deshalb, weil wir eben so eine wichtige Aufgabe haben, dafür kämpfen, sie zu stärken und ihre Werte auch noch mal zu betonen. Ich glaube, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, nie war die OSZE und ihre Parlamentarierversammlung wichtiger als heute. Es ist in der Tat wichtig, auch an die sozioökonomischen Folgen des Krieges zu erinnern. Und hier ist es ganz besonders wichtig, auch noch mal auf Flucht und Migration hinzuweisen, die ja möglicherweise auch eine destabilisierende Rolle in den Aufnahmeländern haben wird. Das ist wichtig, dass wir dies auch mit ins Kalkül ziehen. Ich will aber allen danken, Ihnen hier vorne, aber auch all den Kolleginnen und Kollegen hier im Saal, die sich dafür einsetzen, Unterstützung bei der humanitären Hilfe zu leisten, Unterstützung beim Wiederaufbau zerstörter Städte und Infrastrukturen und die auch einen Beitrag dazu leisten, die Stabilisierung des ukrainischen Staatshaushaltes zu gewährleisten. Ja, es gehört dazu auch der Minderheitenschutz. Migration und Flucht treibt eben auch Leute auseinander, die eben kulturell andersartig sind. Es ist wichtig, dass wir aber im Sinne des Schlussaktes von Helsinki diese Rechte bewahren. Vielen Dank.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Our next speaker from the United States, Representative Joe Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman Hudson of North Carolina. Ladies and gentlemen, Assembly colleagues. 1 year ago, many of us were in Vienna when the news confirmed what we feared. War criminal Putin launched a full-scale war of conquest against the free and sovereign people of Ukraine. Hatred and mass murder were on march on a scale we've not seen in Europe since Hitler and his Kremlin Soviet allies launched the Second World War, invading Poland on September the 1st and September the 16th, 1939, from the west and east. But Ukraine would not be bowed. Free Ukrainians picked up arms in defense of their homeland and struck back against the Putin invasion. Hostomel would not fall. Kyiv would not fall. Ukraine would not fall. Ukraine will succeed. A year later, far from defeat, Ukraine is resilient and resurgent, having pushed back the invaders, liberated territories, and rallied its forces and people. Ukraine is marching forward toward a free and democratic future. This assembly has a role in that future. Achieving solidarity, we can ensure Ukraine's victory over war criminal Putin's sacrificing of young Russians for his personal gain of oil, money, and power. There will be no new Iron Curtain drawn across Europe. We will stand by Ukraine and by the Helsinki principles we hold dear. Aggression will fail. Those responsible for aggression will be held to account. We must all redouble our efforts for Ukraine. Human rights, democracy, and security worldwide are at stake. We stand with Ukraine in the global competition against and between authoritarians of rule of gun opposing democracy's rule of law. We urge you all to join with the United Democrats and Republicans in America, saluting Ukrainians on the eve of this somber anniversary. Thank you for victory for democracies. I yield back.
Thank you. Excellent timing as well, Representative Wilson. I will now announce the next two speakers in the interest of time. First from Canada, Dr. Hedy Fry, and then from Georgia, Ms. Maka Borchesvili. Dr. Fry, you're recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. And just give me a little warning just before my 2 minutes up, because I can't see the clock behind me. I wanted to speak. I'm so thank you to the panelists. They make very important points. And I wanted to speak to the fact that we are an organization for security and cooperation. And security is at the heart of everything. When Russia waged its illegal and aggressive war against the sovereign integrity of Ukraine, it waged war against every single one of us who belong to sovereign nations. It threatened the security of every single one of us. It is also threatening the Euro-Atlantic security. I think this is something Russia must understand. I find it extremely interesting that every year when I bring up 1325 with regard to women, peace, and security, that Russia has always opposed it. And now I know why. Because women are the victims of war. 80% of refugees are women, and when you threaten women, peace, and security, their role, you put them at risk of rape, you put them at risk of trafficking. This is what Russia is doing currently. I don't know if they understand that, and I find it extremely interesting that they have always pushed back against the transparency and accountability for arms control and for weapons, and they have always pushed back against it. So it's interesting to note that in World War II, Russia was on the side fighting dictatorship, fighting aggression, fighting someone who is trying to intrude on the territorial integrity of the nation states. What happened to them? Did they not sign Helsinki in good faith? They have broken that faith. They have broken that trust. We no longer trust them anymore. And I think you have to understand that when you want to be a bully and you want to threaten everyone, we will stand up and speak out. And I want to say how important it is that we let them know that this will not kill the OSCE. This is only strengthening us and our resolve. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dear colleagues, 1 year has passed since Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine started and continues to challenge the entire European security. Today, we are gathered here, members of the Parliamentary Assembly of the organization which was created to ensure peace and security in Europe. But as we speak here, the norms and principles on which European security is based are being undermined and blatantly violated. We have to remember that aggression against Ukraine is a continuation of the same pattern Russia has used in Georgia. Georgia has repeatedly experienced Russian aggression and continues to face Russian occupation and the painful consequences of the war even today. Unfortunately, in 2008, when Georgia became victim of a Russian invasion and our territorial integrity was blatantly violated, the international community failed to give an adequate response that would prevent the same actions in Europe. We still face occupation with Russian military presence in Georgian regions, Abkhazia and Tskhin Valley, that is neither legal nor justified. We still have barbed wire fences installed inside our country that divides families, create barriers between people. We have hundreds of thousands of people who are forcibly displaced from their homes, whose rights are violated. European Court of Human Rights judgment in 2021, International Criminal Court decision in 2022 clearly attests that Russia bears responsibility for violations of international law and human rights in Georgia. Today, we must speak with one voice and make it clear that there is no place for brutal military invasions in Europe. We have to be clear and firm. States should not be punished for exercising the sovereign right to choose their own future. We do have full right to implementation of our sovereign choices. Russia has to be stopped and not allowed to undermine sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence of neighboring states. With its aggressive policies, this has to be done with
Thank you.
unity and our common actions. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker from Turkey is Mr. Yusuf Bashir, who will be followed by Mr. Mark Pritchard from the United Kingdom. Mr. Bashir, you have the floor.
Sayın Başkan, değerli meslektaşlarım, Türkiye'de 6 Şubat'ta meydana gelen 100.000 kilometrelik bir alanda etkili olan 13 milyon vatandaşımızın etkilendiği, yıkıcı depremlerin yol açtığı 43.000'den fazla vatandaşımızın vefatının derin üzüntüsünü yaşıyoruz.
Esteemed President, valuable colleagues, we are deeply saddened by the great loss of life of 43,000 people caused by the devastating earthquakes that took place in Turkey on a land area of 100,000 kilometer squares on the February 6th.
Sayın Cumhurbaşkanımız Recep Tayyip Erdoğan'ın liderliğinde asrın felaketinin yol açtığı yaraları sarmak için tüm birimlerimizle insanüstü gayretle çalışıyoruz.
Under the leadership of our president, we are working with all our institutions in an inhumane effort so that we can heal the wounds inflicted by this earthquake.
Yakın bir tarihte de yıkılan bölgeleri yeniden inşa edeceğimize yürekten inanıyorum.
And I wholeheartedly believe that in the shortest time frame possible, we will reconstruct all those areas which collapsed.
Depremlerin hemen ardından arama kurtarma ekipleri ve insani yardım gönderen, mesajlarıyla acımızı paylaşan, dayanışma gösteren tüm AGİT katılımcı devletlerine bu oturum vesilesiyle tekrar teşekkür etmek istiyorum. Bu destek ve dayanışmayı unutmayacağız.
On the occasion of this session, I would like to thank all the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe participating states who sent search and rescue teams and humanitarian aid and shared our pain with their messages and showed solidarity right after the earthquakes. We will never forget this support and solidarity.
Yarın Ukrayna'ya yönelik savaşın başlangıcının trajik yıl dönümünü anacağız. Geride bıraktığımız bir yıl boyunca Ukrayna halkının çektiği acıya tanık olduk.
Tomorrow we will commemorate and remember the tragic anniversary of the beginning of the war against Ukraine. During the last year, we have witnessed the suffering of the Ukrainian people.
Thank you.
Sivil altyapı zarar gördü, maddi hasar milyonlarca doları buldu. Milyonlarca insan elektrik, su ve diğer temel ihtiyaçlarının sıkıntısını çekiyor.
The civil infrastructure was damaged and property damage amounted to billions of dollars, and millions of people suffer from electricity, clean water, and other lack of basic needs.
Thank you very much.
Ukrayna'ya yönelik bu yıkıcı savaş bir an önce
Your
durmalı.
time has expired.
This devastating war against Ukraine must stop immediately.
Thank you very much. I gave you a little extra time because of the consecutive interpretation, but your time is expired by almost 1 minute. We now recognize Mr. Mark Pritchard from the United Kingdom, followed by Farah Karimi from the Netherlands.
Mr. Chairman, can I first of all thank you for your leadership and say from the outset that the UK delegation here today objects in the strongest possible terms to the presence of the Russian and Belarusian delegation. Ukraine is not the EU's border, as we know. It is not NATO's border, but it is freedom's border. And today, as we sit here, the brave men and women of Ukraine are fighting for all of our freedoms. They are on the front line of freedom, for Europe's freedom, and all that share in the democratic values and the rule of law beliefs that we have as an organization. And as has already been said, Russia will not divide this organization. Russia will not kill off this organization. We will emerge stronger, more united, more resolute, more resilient as a result of their actions behind the scenes to try and undermine this organization diplomatically and politically. But Mr. Chairman, as you will know, Ukraine still needs more weapons and more quickly. And I call upon all colleagues from NATO and non-NATO members to do all they can to encourage their governments to supply those weapons to Ukraine. Let me be clear. Russia is losing this war, but Russia needs to lose more quickly. But President Putin has been successful in one regard, in isolating Russia. Today, it is politically, diplomatically, and militarily more weak and more isolated than ever. Putin has united NATO, united the EU, and united in this assembly both the left and the right of politics. Mr. Chairman, we all want peace, but in order to have a strong peace, we need a strong defense. So let us all today stay determined and committed in ensuring that Ukraine gets that strong defense.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair now recognizes Farah Karimi, who will be followed by Valerie Boyer. Ms. Karimi, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The aggressive war waged by Russia against Ukraine, which started 1 year ago, is an abhorrent violation of international law, principles of OSCE, and basic human decency. The deliberate targeting of civilians and civil infrastructures like power plants, schools, and hospitals by Russian military attacks is a clear war crime, as is the torture, rape, and killing of innocent people. It is unconcessionable that the Russian government thought it could attack another sovereign country and commit such atrocities without consequences. We stand with Ukraine in condemning these actions strongly and providing support to the Ukrainian people. We must use all means necessary to end the suffering of the Ukrainian people. Those who lead the Russian Federation, Mr. Putin and his supporters in Duma, and military and security forces must be held accountable for their aggression and for the war crimes committed by Russia in Ukraine. They cannot expect to be respected as a member of the international community or a participant in the OSCE when they behave in such a barbaric and inhuman manner. When they violate the principles of this organization, which they have committed to respecting, they forfeit their respect. History will judge them harshly for their actions, and they will be remembered as aggressors who inflicted great harm on innocent people. We must continue to stand with Ukraine with meaningful action. We must provide aid and support to those affected by the war, and we must welcome Ukrainian refugees into our homes and communities. We must also work to ensure that justice is served and that those responsible for the war crimes are held accountable for their actions. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair will now recognize Valerie Boyer of France, followed by Mr. Defosse of Belgium. Ms. Boyer, you have the floor.
Mesdames, Messieurs, mes chers collègues, permettez-moi en tant que membre de la délégation française de remercier la présidence de la POSCE de tenir cette session un an après le début de l'invasion en Ukraine. Je soutiens tout ce qui a été dit en faveur de l'Ukraine, mais je vais vous parler d'un autre conflit, celui de l'Azerbaïdjan vis-à-vis de l'Arménie. Je dois saluer la décision prise par l'Union européenne de déployer une mission d'observation à la frontière entre l'Arménie et l'Azerbaïdjan, décision que j'avais soutenue en novembre dernier devant l'Assemblée réunie à Varsovie. Cette mission, forte d'une centaine de membres, dont 50 observateurs non armés, sera déployée pour 2 ans du côté arménien de la frontière arméno-azerbaïdjanaise et devra permettre de contribuer et d'assurer la stabilité des zones frontalières avec l'Arménie. L'Union européenne exprime enfin sa solidarité vis-à-vis de l'Arménie et s'inscrit volontairement dans une démarche de désescalade en faveur du conflit du Nagorno-Karabakh. Mais mes chers collègues, aujourd'hui, vous le savez, 120 000 Arméniens en Artsakh sont bloqués. Il manque de tout, de chauffage, de médicaments. Ils sont séparés de leur famille. Et je voudrais lancer un cri d'alarme pour ces personnes qui sont bloquées aujourd'hui. Il s'agit d'une question existentielle. Mes chers collègues, on ne peut pas, d'un côté, juste regarder l'Ukraine avec justesse et la soutenir, et de l'autre côté, ne pas regarder ce qui se passe aujourd'hui pour nos amis arméniens qui siègent ici. Notre solidarité vis-à-vis d'eux doit être totale. Et il faut absolument faire cesser ce blocus. Je voudrais aussi demander le retour des prisonniers à l'issue de la guerre cruelle de novembre 2020. Ils restent toujours là-bas et j'espère que cette assemblée verra une motion de soutien vis-à-vis du peuple arménien aujourd'hui isolé et qui ne bénéficie pas de cette aide. Mes chers collègues, est-ce que la vie des Arméniens vaut moins que celle des Ukrainiens?
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Defosse of Belgium to be followed by Mr. Dariusz Rosati of Poland. Mr. Defosse, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Chers collègues, l'agression injustifiée de la Russie contre l'Ukraine nous glace le sang. Nous voyons les images terrifiantes des crimes qui sont commis quotidiennement contre la population ukrainienne et les responsables devront être jugés pour ça. Et nous voyons aussi le courage de cette même population qui résiste héroïquement et je tiens à lui exprimer toute ma solidarité. Gérer les crises et offrir en tout temps un espace de dialogue, c'est la raison première de l'existence de l'OSCE. Parce que le dialogue est la seule voie possible. Peu importe l'issue de la guerre en cours, et je sais que l'Ukraine sera en position de force, il faudra se retrouver autour d'une table et discuter. C'est pourquoi l'OSCE doit tout faire pour ouvrir la porte de la diplomatie. C'est encore possible, mais il y a urgence pour la sécurité de notre région et plus généralement pour les valeurs qui fondent l'acte final d'Helsinki. Enfin, dans cette crise émerge la menace de l'emploi de l'arme nucléaire. Au fil de ses discours délirants, le président russe a régulièrement fait des allusions à cette éventualité. Or, nous savons que cela mènerait inévitablement à une apocalypse où il n'y aurait ni gagnant, ni perdant, ni accord, ni discussion. Plus rien, seulement un désastre sans nom que personne dans cette salle ne peut même imaginer. La dissuasion nucléaire ne peut fonctionner qu'entre gens raisonnables. Qui peut aujourd'hui croire, au vu de la guerre que nous connaissons, que Vladimir Poutine est raisonnable? Je pense donc que l'OSCE, si elle veut jouer son rôle pour la sécurité en Europe, doit aussi s'engager pour la reprise des discussions diplomatiques entre ses membres visant non seulement la non-prolifération, mais plus encore l'interdiction de ces armes à terme. Ce n'est pas pour demain, je le crains et je le sais, mais ça doit faire partie de nos objectifs. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you. The chair will now recognize Mr. Rosati of Poland to be followed by Mr. Milan Kojo.
Yes,
of Kyrgyzstan.
Mr. Chairman, dear fellow parliamentarians, our meeting takes place exactly on the eve of the first anniversary of the Russian invasion against Ukraine. And this fact has started the war and shown that thousands of people in Ukraine have been killed or injured, and large parts of the Ukrainian territory has been destroyed. Through this brutal attack, Russia has not only trampled on its commitments, but it also violated fundamental principles of international law. Faced with this challenge, and this is an existential challenge not only for the Western community, but also for this organization, we have to show strength, resolve, and unity. And I see 3 areas on which we should focus. The first one is we should continue to provide military assistance to Ukraine in order to enable brave Ukrainians to defend their country and to prevail on the battlefield. And second, we have to strengthen and extend the sanctions imposed on the Russian Federation in order to permanently reduce the capability of Russia to wage wars against its neighbors and to reduce the financial possibilities to finance its war machine. And third, I agree with the calls by many colleagues here that we have to hold Russia responsible. We have to hold all those who are responsible for these atrocities accountable. And this is the task for this organization, to work together with other partner organizations, partner countries, to find a format within which we can simply bring those responsible and guilty to justice.
Thank you. The chair will now recognize Mr. Sami Kojo from Kyrgyzstan to be followed by Mr. Rihards Kols of Latvia. Mr. Sami Kojo, you have the floor for 2 minutes.
Уважаемый господин председатель, уважаемые коллеги, позвольте мне от имени делегации Жогорку Кенеша Кыргызской Республики приветствовать председателя комитета докладчиков и всех приглашенных гостей сегодняшнего заседания. Уважаемые участники, Жогорку Кенеш Кыргызской Республики продолжает активное участие в работе парламентской ассамблеи ОБСЕ, тем самым внося свой вклад в укрепление парламентаризма в регионе, а также усиление тесного сотрудничества между всеми парламентами региона ОБСЕ. Угроза международному миру и безопасности, а также страдания, вызываемые конфликтами, недопустимы. Парламентарии Кыргызстана готовы работать со своими коллегами и всеми заинтересованными странами для достижения мирного решения конфликтов. С большим сопереживанием следим за ситуацией в Украине. Не исходим из того, что любой конфликт необходимо разрешать исключительно политико-дипломатическими средствами всем заинтересованным странам. Необходимо искать любые возможности для разрешения ситуации, в том числе путем создания новых форматов и механизмов, если существующие перестали работать. Мы поддерживаем любые посреднические усилия и оказать необходимое содействие, чтобы сложился мир и взаимопонимание. Мы считаем, что парламентская ассамблея ОБСЕ необходимо сделать все возможное, чтобы внести свой вклад в установление мира, стабильности в Украине. В этой связи мы поддерживаем назначение вице-президента парламентской ассамблеи ОБСЕ, члена парламента Австрии господина Рейнолда Лопатку на должность специального представителя парламентской ассамблеи ОБСЕ по содействию парламентскому диалогу по Украине. Уважаемые коллеги, мы рады приветствовать Верховного комиссара ОБСЕ по делам национальных меньшинств, нашего дорогого коллегу Кайрата Абдрахманова на заседании парламентской ассамблеи ОБСЕ. Верховный комиссар и его офис продолжает оказывать поддержку Кыргызстану по реализации концепции развития гражданской идентичности кыргызжарана, а также по вопросам многоязычного и поликультурного образования в Кыргызской Республике 2020-2023 годы. Уважаемые парламентарии, пользуясь случаем, выражаем поддержку соболезнования нашим азербайджанским коллегам в связи со смертью сотрудника посольства Азербайджанской Республики, Исламской Республики и Иран. Также позвольте выразить соболезнования нашим турецким коллегам в связи с многочисленными человеческими жертвами результата землетрясений. Желаю прежде всего терпения родным и близким погибших и скорейшего выздоровления пострадавшим. Благодарю вас за внимание.
Thank you. I'll now recognize Mr. Kols of Latvia, followed by Mr. Fatih from Albania. Mr. Kols, you recognize the chair.
Just a few reflections from the panels that I heard. So, Mr. Kairat, I have to point out that there is no such a thing as language minority. There are minority languages, but not language minority. And that is exactly why I'm pointing out that is being exploited, particularly by Russia, when, you know, such a term as Russian-speaking minority. There is no such a thing. And that should be also revealed in the official documentation of OSCE. Another thing I wanted to point out to Ms. Yuriola There is no crisis in Ukraine. It's a war in Ukraine since 2014. And I would kindly ask to avoid using such a terms as crisis in Ukraine. It started in 2014, and only in 24th of February, we saw a huge resumption of the Russian aggression towards full-scale war in Ukraine. But ladies and gentlemen, just few things that I wanted to mention in this intervention is particularly OSCE functionings and role. We see that the OSCE, by particular country, Russian Federation, have been used and abused and exploited for years. And we talk right now that, we stand up to our principles and values and statutes. We don't. I mean, there's an elephant in this room, which is called by name Russian Federation delegation. I mean, if they're a witness, if I were a witness and somebody asked me, who's the war criminal? Well, I will point to the backbenchers in this room. And it's just disgrace. It's a disgrace that this delegation is here, particularly the delegation that consists of members who are sanctioned individuals who voted to annex independent countries' territories, Donbass, Kherson, Zaporizhia Oblast, Lugansk. Those are the principles this institution was vouched to protect and guard. And we're sitting like nothing happened. I would use the momentum, and apologies, Mr. Chair. I will convey a message to the Russian Federation delegation sitting in this room, and I will quote the Ukrainian border guards. Русский военный корабль пошел нахуй.
Thank you. Thank you.
Responses na Latvia.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Madu of Albania, followed by Mr. Ilya Donbama from Romania. You have the floor, Mr. Madu, for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. 1 year from now, we all understand what's going on. The war against Ukraine is a war against Europe and against democracies. But as my friend from Latvia mentioned, we have an elephant in the room. We should see another elephant that is joining this authoritarian regime, China and Russia together, trying to attack democracies. And strategic ambiguity is a big mistake for all of us and gives room for more conflicts. I want to thank Congressman Adderholt and also Congressman Joe Wilson and Pete Sessions that hosted a good event in the American Congress in January about Russian aggression. And also want to thank Secretary General of OSCE, Roberto Montella, for his participation in stating the position of this organization. War in Ukraine is a reminder of the fragility of the world today. Aggressor states such Russia, but also China, seeks to take advantage of global uncertainties, not just through armed warfare, but also through economic warfare, using economic advantages as a weapon. China and Russia and others seeks to exploit our individual and collective economic security as means of advancing their geopolitical objectives. That's why you should think how we can act. And I think it's time for all of us to take concrete steps. The first step in reducing our exposure is to limit opportunities for exploitation. The United States passed the Foreign Risk Review Modernization Act, the European Union Regulation 2019-452, Foreign Direct Investment Screening, which are leading examples of legislation designed toward adversarial economic statecraft. So we should take,
Thank you.
also as also OSCE countries, this position as well. Slava Ukraini.
Your time has expired. Thank you. Did I see a point of order from the Russian Federation?
Уважаемый господин председатель, уважаемые члены комитета, российская делегация здесь находится по праву и не является слоном. Мы не
The delegate will
потерпим
suspend.
оскорблений в адрес России,
Delegate,
в адрес
the delegate will
нашего
suspend.
президента.
Please state your point of order.
Не дадим возможности врагам России
Delegate will suspend.
в каком стиле в этой ассамблее.
Must ask if
Поэтому
you stop
те, кто хотят
disorderly behavior.
оскорбить Россию, могут выйти из этого
Mr.
зала
Tolstoy,
вместе со своими украинскими флагами.
Mr. Tolstoy,
Спасибо.
I asked the member to desist from disorderly behavior. If the member continues this disorderly behavior under Rule 9, I direct the fact that I've called the member to order twice be recorded in the minutes of the proceedings. Also warn the member that if they continue their behavior, I shall have to exclude him from the remainder of this sitting.
Next speaker.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Ilia Danbama of Romania, followed by Mr. Mark Vesey of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, distinguished colleagues. Tomorrow will mark a year since Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered his troops to invade Ukraine. Today, we are proud to be here with like-minded parliamentarians from across the globe to reaffirm our resounding support for an independent and sovereign Ukraine. Romania's positions regarding the war against Ukraine is clear-cut. Support and solidarity with Ukraine, continuous condemnations of the Russian aggression, firm and strong stance on Russia and in the multilateral formats to give a clear signal to Russia and to all other actors using or attempt to use force that such an approach will have consequences. Ukraine alone will decide the parameters and modalities if, where, when, and how of eventual peace talks with Russia. We fully support the condition advanced by Ukraine in formula for peace. The ongoing war in Ukraine has a major negative impact in the region. The massive rocket attack against civilian targets in Ukraine, some of which crosses the Republic of Moldova airspace, urged Chișinău to ask for Western financial and military support in order to create a credible national air defense capabilities. The Republic of Moldova is confronted with an unpredictable security environment, a deterioration of already difficult social economic situations, including challenges in the energy sector, and more recently, external attempt to overthrow the constitutional order. Therefore, the Republic of Moldova also need our immediate support. OSCE must continue to offer assistance and support in these challenging times to countries most affected by this unjustified and unprovoked war run by Russia. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Mark Vesey of the United States, followed by Mr. Johannes Koskinen from Finland. Mr. Vesey, you're recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, before I begin, I just want to send our deepest condolences to the Turkish colleagues here as they work to rebuild their country. I want to begin by addressing a fundamental question. Why are we here today? Some may reasonably ask, why are we participating in this committee, given the presence of a delegation whose members express the most hateful and vile propaganda and whose actions have precipitated the greatest calamity this body has been witness to? Why are we here in the same room as delegates from countries in such fundamental violation of every principle this body was founded on? First, we are here to make sure our friends, the people of Ukraine, know we are with them for as long as it takes, and to be on the record that we will not allow this blatant aggression to stand. We are here to not leave unchallenged the lies and distortions offered by the aggressors in the war that is consuming Europe. Mr. Chairman, we are here to chart a way forward. There is much work to be done, and we must do it in concert with allies who have demonstrated their firm commitment to the foundational principles of this assemblies. With these countries, our allies, we will move forward to support Ukraine and counter Russia's war of aggression together. It is crystal clear today that the Kremlin's contempt for this institution was on display a year ago when it publicly claimed no invasion was planned while simultaneously refusing to engage the very measures created to ascertain the truth of the matter. Colleagues, the fact that Russia and Belarus make a mockery of their own commitment should not turn us away from the tools at our disposal here that we can and should make a positive difference for the Ukrainian people. We have work to do, and OSCE has the tools to contribute. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Koskinen from Finland, followed by Ms. Irene Shalambides. I apologize. I love you, Irene from Cyprus. I'll now recognize Mr. Koskinen from Finland first for 2 minutes.
Mr. Chair, dear colleagues, during Russia's illegal war against Ukraine, more than 7,000 civilians have been killed so far, nearly 500 of them children. Tens of thousands of young soldiers have died in this war, and millions of Ukrainians have had to flee their homes. We condemned this attack a year ago, and we condemn it today. We'll stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. OSCE is an organization for security. In today's Europe, that seems like a distant dream. OSCE will need to reshape the focus and rules of procedure to be able to act. We were not able to stop this war. Our tools did not work. So what should we do to remain relevant? I think it is time to reform OSCE's work and agenda. Through the Helsinki Plus 50 process, we need a new direction, new relevance, new strength for this organization. The Russian attack is a reminder of how we must continue our efforts to maintain and strengthen our democracies, as well as our efforts in conflict prevention, peace building, and rules-based world order. Despite the war, Ukrainians have managed to keep running their country. We admire this and wish that they keep the moral all the way until pushing the Russians out of the territory. Thanks.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Ms. Shalambides, followed by Oscar Mina from San Marino. Ms. Shalambides, you have the floor for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I would like to offer my deepest condolences to our colleagues from Turkey. They suffered unthinkable losses because of the earthquake. More than 45,000 people dead, among them little children. My heart is with them. This year's winter meeting takes place on a dark anniversary on the 1-year mark from the day that deep divisions returned to Europe, the invasion of Russia in Ukraine. Respect for international law remains the cornerstone of a rules-based international order. National sovereignty, territorial integrity, abstaining from the use of force are the core values upon which international legality is based. Revisionism cannot be justified in any case. The forceful change of borders cannot be legitimized. A return to respect for international law is the only way forward. Cyprus is committed to supporting negotiation and dialogue as long as they are undermined by these principles. At the same time, as the military confrontation continues, the stakes for the peoples of Europe could not be higher. The risk of another devastating world war or of the use of nuclear weapons cannot be outruled, particularly after the suspension of the New START treaty, which was the last remaining nuclear arms control treaty. Our fears for a nuclear war are heightened as ever. It is in the benefit of mankind to prevent further escalation in this field. Our shared commitment to peace, security, and stability requires that we do not cut off channels of communication and engagement, even with the most difficult actors. We must continue to strive to maintain the OSCE as a platform for dialogue and cooperation, even in times like these or I would say particularly in times like these.
Thank you. Your time has expired.
Just a sentence. We should talk more about peace, less about escalation of war and nuclear weapons. We owe it to humanity.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Oscar Mina, followed by Ms. Lilit Minasyan from Armenia. Mr. Mina, you have the floor for 2 minutes. Mr. Mina is Mr. Mina in the chamber? The chair will then move to Ms. Lilit Minasyan from Armenia to be followed by Mr. Luis Grace from Portugal.
Thank you.
Ms. Minasyan, you have the floor for 2 minutes.
Dear colleagues, understandably, the attention of the whole world is currently focused on the war in Ukraine, and Armenia is a country that encountered the horror of war and still addresses the devastating consequences of aggression unleashed against the people of Nagorno-Karabakh, deeply values the preservation of international law and order. You all have heard about the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict that has been lasting for more than 3 decades. But today I don't want to talk about the historical context of the conflict. I don't want to refer to the destructive policy of Azerbaijan. I don't want to address the false thesis put forward by Azerbaijan either. Dear attendees, today I want to draw your attention to the humanitarian crisis. In the 21st century, 120,000 Armenians living in the European region are deprived of the right of free movement and basic life conditions. In the 21st century, due to Azerbaijani state policy of ethnic cleansing, Armenians are deprived of gas and electricity and still don't have proper access to hot water and heating in several cold winter days with fluctuating temperature. 30,000 children in Nagorno-Karabakh deprived of right to an education because of cold. In the 21st century, people get food with coupons. All the false narratives of Azerbaijan regarding the blockade of Lachin corridor have been denied not only by the Armenian authorities, but also by all international structures, the European Parliament, the PASE, and many countries of the UN Security Council session. They clearly stated that the Lachin corridor should be unplugged and should be restored without preconditions. In response to all this, the president of Azerbaijan found a solution. Whoever does not want to be a citizen of our country is free to leave his birthplace, homeland. Dear colleagues, today is one sentence, please. Today in this hall, we are talking about incomparable disasters for many, but I'm deeply convinced that the injustice that happens somewhere is a challenge to justice everywhere. Thank you.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Grace from Portugal, followed by Mr. Andrew Gwynn from the United Kingdom. Mr. Grace, you're recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Chair, President Richard Hudson, dear colleagues, I want to express in my name and in the name of the Portuguese Parliament, which tomorrow will be covered with the colors of Ukraine, our strong support to Ukrainian people in this fight for a world ruled by the force of the law and not by the law of the force. A year ago, many of us here in Vienna were taken by surprise by the Russian Federation unfair invasion of Ukraine. A year later, perhaps as surprisingly as the start of the war, it seems increasingly clear that Russia cannot and will not win the war it started. Ukraine resists. Moreover, the invasion gave body and soul to Ukraine's sovereignty and independence. Mr. Chairman, President Putin's speech we heard last days, it was the opposite of the symbolism of President Biden's visit to Kiev. On one hand, the light of fraternity and respect for international law, and other, the speech without any mobilizing capacity, which boils down to the threat of suspension of nuclear treaties that increase, I would even say dangerously increase, the level of international isolation of the Russian Federation and expose President Putin's isolation from what is really going on. I believe OSHA has a paper to do in this conflict. And if we have to condemn the Russian invasion, and strongly support Ukraine, we have to give peace a chance. And I believe if we can mobilize our national parliaments and our citizens for this demand and make peace a goal of OSCE Parliament, we can save OSCE paper and give it a diplomatic role in the world and help Ukraine to build and rebuild their lives and their country independent. Slava Ukraine.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Mr. Andrew Gwynn of the United Kingdom, followed by Ludovic Hay from France. Mr. Gwynn, you have the floor for 2 minutes.
Thank you. On the 24th of February 2022, I, like millions of others, switched on the news and watched Russian tanks roll over the border into Ukraine. Putin's illegal invasion had begun. A brutal, blatant and bloody violation of international law. Be clear. Vladimir Putin is a tyrant, and like all tyrants, believes himself to be able to sidestep the consequences. But Putin did not count on the untiring spirit of the Ukrainian people. He didn't consider the Ukrainian men, women, and children who would stand up against his tyranny, nor did he anticipate the extraordinary leadership of President Zelensky. Ukraine has lost so much, and I wish to extend the full support of the British people and of the British Parliament to the Ukrainian delegation here in Vienna, but understandably not in this hall, with Russia's unnecessary and unwelcome presence. Mr. Chair, the Russian people also have been plunged into chaos by Putin and his cronies, who have stolen their freedom and their future. They are beholden to the whims of a capricious despot, and they are silenced by the cruel fist of the Kremlin when they speak out of turn. Putin is a threat to democracy, and he must not be allowed to win. He must be held accountable for his actions in Ukraine, for the war crimes, for the thousands of Ukrainian people who have been killed defending their land, for the annexation of Crimea, for the Salisbury poisoning of the Skripals and the death of Dawn Burgess, and for the abuse of human rights, the domestic persecution of LGBTQ people, and the oppression of religious minorities. The United Kingdom stands firmly with our Ukrainian friends. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Ludovic Hay from France, followed by Andre Hunko from Germany. Ludovic Hay, you have the floor for 2 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et Messieurs les ambassadeurs et membres du bureau, chers collègues. L'OSCE a toujours pu s'appuyer sur un certain nombre d'outils et de traités pour mener à bien les missions qui lui ont été confiées. Parmi eux, le Forum pour la coopération en matière de sécurité est l'organe de décision de l'OSCE dans le domaine politico-militaire. Son objectif est d'accroître la sécurité et la stabilité en Europe, et son mandat touche à certains des accords politico-militaires les plus fondamentaux des États participants, comme le traité sur le régime ciel ouvert, le document de Vienne et le traité sur les forces armées conventionnelles en Europe. En marge de ces véritables piliers, l'OSCE peut également compter sur d'autres traités, certes extérieurs à l'organisation, mais non moins indispensables à sa mission de contrôle et de maîtrise des armements promus par l'OSCE. C'est le cas notamment du traité New Start, qui constitue un instrument essentiel de l'architecture internationale de maîtrise des armements nucléaires et de stabilité stratégique. Aux côtés de ses alliés de l'OTAN, la France avait déjà exprimé le 3 février dernier son inquiétude quant à une potentielle fragilisation de ce traité. Fragilisation qui vient de se concrétiser par le souhait de la Fédération de Russie de suspendre sa participation à ce traité. Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et Messieurs, chers collègues, dans le contexte actuel de remise en cause et de fragilisation de traités majeurs et fondamentaux dans le contrôle des armements et de respect du moratoire sur les essais nucléaires notamment, comment l'OSCE compte-t-elle désormais concrètement se donner les moyens de mener à bien cette mission, véritable gage du maintien de la paix en Europe?
Thank you. Chair now recognizes Andre Honko, followed by Mr. Mark Demesmaeker from Belgium.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident. Die OSZE ist in den dunkelsten Stunden des Kalten Kriegs in den 70er Jahren oder ihre Vorläuferorganisationen entstanden und sie hat einen ganz wichtigen Beitrag geleistet, um diesen Kalten Krieg zu überwinden. Und das ist eine Verpflichtung auch, die wir tragen. Wir haben die Verpflichtung, diesen Krieg, die Verletzung des Völkerrechts, die Kriegsverbrechen zu verurteilen. Aber ich glaube, wir haben noch mehr Verpflichtungen. Wir haben die Verpflichtung, diese Organisation zu erhalten, den Rahmen eines Dialoges zu erhalten, weil der Rahmen wichtig bleiben kann. Und wir haben auch die Verpflichtung, alles zu tun, um eine weitere Eskalation dieses Krieges und einen jahrelangen Abnutzungskrieg zu verhindern. Und ich glaube, dass in den letzten Punkten zu wenig Anstrengungen gegenwärtig gemacht werden. In meinem Land, in Deutschland, wünscht sich eine Mehrheit der Menschen mehr diplomatische Initiativen, um die Fortsetzung und Eskalation dieses Krieges zu verhindern. Und ich glaube, dass wir diesem Wunsch Rechnung tragen sollten. Vorgestern bei der Rede von Putin ist einer der letzten verbliebenen Verträge, die nukleare Begrenzung beinhalten, in Frage gestellt worden. Er hat den New START Treaty Vertrag suspendiert. Andere Verträge sind schon gekündigt worden. Wir stehen möglicherweise an der Schwelle einer neuen, auch atomaren Eskalation. Und ich glaube, dass es unsere Verantwortung ist, diese Entwicklung zu stoppen, auch durch diplomatische Initiativen und Dialog. Vielen Dank.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes Mr. Demesmaeker from Belgium, followed by Jean-Yves Leconte from France. Mr. Demesmaeker, you have the floor for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I first want to express our condolences to our Turkish friends and assure them our solidarity and full support. Colleagues, the war against Ukraine is the most serious assault on the post-Cold War security architecture in Europe and the West. The impact on the global economy is huge. It's threatening food security in parts of the world. And the immediate consequences, of course, for the people of Ukraine are huge. Putin can't achieve his goals on the battlefield, so he attacks cities, destroys civilian architecture, kills citizens. As a former journalist, and I still am deep in my heart, I want to see myself. So I went and I saw twice since the beginning of the war. Liberated but destroyed cities, looted, mass grave with 400 murdered civilians, one of the many. I heard testimonies of tortured people, raped women and girls. I saw myself so that nobody would be in a position to tell me that it is all staged or fake. And frankly, these are the only signs and evidence of Nazism behavior that the Kremlin says it is fighting, that I saw, namely inflicted by Russia itself. In fact, he is combining the worst elements of the worst ideologies and political systems we have seen last century, Hitler's Nazism and Stalin's communism. His high-ranking cronies, whom of which are also present in this room, are co-perpetrator in these acts of genocide. And it is surrealistic to be in one room with them, with war criminals and discussing security in Europe at the same time. It is grotesque. Their delegation leader called in November to destroy Ukraine and to send it back to the 18th century. Its place is in the dock of the Special War Tribunal for the crime of aggression against Ukraine that will be established and that will judge the Kremlin leadership, including him. I understand that real dialogue is impossible now, but I hope the repeated messages here really come through. There is a way out of aggression. That is to stop the aggression and respect the international recognized borders of Ukraine. Slava Ukraini!
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Jean-Yves Leconte from France, followed by Ms. Christina Michaud from Canada. Leconte has the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Dialoguer pour tourner la page d'affrontement, construire par le dialogue des principes de vie commune, c'est l'esprit d'Helsinki. On ne remerciera jamais assez ceux qui l'ont construit et son premier inspirateur, Willy Brandt. Dans le Caucase, dans les Balkans, au cours des dernières années, l'Europe a connu des guerres. Mais jusqu'il y a peu, l'OSCE restait un outil pour dépasser les conflits et retrouver la paix. Force est de constater que ce n'est plus le cas aujourd'hui. Par la faute de Vladimir Poutine et de ses complices, la Russie tourne le dos à ses principes. La Russie bombarde des civils. Son armée et ses milices violent en masse, déportent des enfants. Ces crimes contre l'humanité, ces crimes de génocide, sont accompagnés d'une rhétorique qui insulte la vérité, qui insulte l'histoire de l'ensemble des peuples de l'espace de l'OSCE. Les Ukrainiens combattent pour que ces principes de liberté, d'autodétermination, les principes d'Helsinki prévalent en Ukraine, mais aussi sur toute l'Europe. C'est la raison pour laquelle le soutien militaire le plus décisif doit leur être apporté afin d'avoir une réponse efficace, rapide, qui tourne la page de ces horreurs le plus rapidement possible. Ceux qui ordonnent ces crimes, ceux qui les commettent, ceux qui les justifient, qui sont des actes terroristes, doivent répondre de leurs actes. Nous devons au plus vite mettre en place dans nos juridictions nationales, nous sommes des parlementaires nationaux, mais aussi au niveau des tribunaux de la Cour pénale internationale, les éléments pour que tout ceci, les éléments de sanction puissent fonctionner le plus rapidement possible. Et Monsieur le Président, permettez-moi de conclure en ajoutant que la présence dans cette salle de personnes qui font l'apologie de ces crimes et de ces actes terroristes est un scandale. Slava Ukraine.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Ms. Michaud of Canada to be followed by Azay Guriev from Azerbaijan. Ms. Michaud, you have the floor for 2 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Demain marquera le premier anniversaire de l'agression russe sur le peuple ukrainien. Nous aurions espéré ne jamais avoir à souligner ce triste et sombre anniversaire. Depuis 1 an, l'Ukraine est bombardée, agressée, persécutée. Depuis 1 an, l'Ukraine résiste. En tant que parlementaire québécoise à la Chambre des communes du Canada, je tiens à réitérer notre soutien indéfectible à l'Ukraine. Nous ne le rappellerons jamais assez, la Russie viole le droit international, la Charte des Nations unies, ainsi que les valeurs et les principes fondamentaux de l'OSCE. Nous condamnons non seulement l'agression russe, mais également toute la campagne de désinformation que la Russie mène à l'intérieur et au-delà de ses frontières. Il est déplorable que les parlementaires russes perpétuent cette désinformation à l'intérieur même de l'Assemblée parlementaire de l'OSCE, ici, à Vienne, à l'occasion de notre réunion d'hiver. Ne devrions-nous pas utiliser ce forum au profit du dialogue, se demandent certains. Et ils ont raison. En tant que parlementaires, nous devons être de bonne foi et faire confiance à la diplomatie parlementaire. Elle nous permet de discuter et de travailler ensemble au-delà des frontières. Elle est devenue un aspect incontournable des relations internationales. L'histoire a d'ailleurs montré que la diplomatie parlementaire pouvait contribuer à la résolution des conflits internationaux. Ensemble, les parlements peuvent jouer un rôle clé dans la prévention des conflits, la médiation internationale, la réconciliation et la consolidation de la paix. Mais il est aussi du devoir des parlementaires d'attirer l'attention sur les situations où les droits de la personne sont menacés. Et dans certains cas, lorsque le dialogue parlementaire est confronté au monologue d'une seule nation, la conversation devient difficile, la diplomatie aussi. Dans ce cas-ci, il est primordial que nous, parlementaires des États membres de l'OSCE, nous exprimions d'une voix commune pour dénoncer les actions de la Russie en Ukraine. Nous devons être solidaires et nous rappeler les principes de l'OSCE ainsi que ceux de la déclaration de Birmingham que nous avons adoptée en juillet dernier, qui condamne avec la plus grande fermeté la guerre d'agression menée par la Fédération de Russie contre l'Ukraine et qui est, ne l'oublions pas, facilitée par le Bélarus. En tant que représentants de nos parlements, nous devons réitérer notre intention de continuer à apporter un soutien politique, diplomatique, financier et humanitaire à l'Ukraine, tant aussi longtemps qu'il le faudra. Nous devons consolider les efforts parlementaires en faveur de la restauration de l'intégrité territoriale et la souveraineté de l'Ukraine. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Mr. Guliev to be followed by Mr. Nick Smith from the United Kingdom. Mr. Guliev, you're recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much.
Dear Chair, first of all, let me express my condolences to Turkish friends and those who lost their beloveds as a result of devastating earthquake. Dear friends, as you witnessed, a delegation of Armenia and pro-Armenian members from France have again misused this assembly to disseminate their propaganda and misuse inflammatory rhetoric and use inflammatory rhetoric against Azerbaijan. I will simply ignore many of them, but make some clarification on the real situation in the Russian road and the Karabakh region of Azerbaijan. I resolutely reject any accusation of so-called blockade or humanitarian catastrophe in Karabakh. It is enough to mention that since the peaceful protest started, roughly 3,000 vehicles of Russian peacekeeping contingent and International Red Cross and local Armenian residents passed in both directions along the Russian road without any impediment. You can easily check it from the videos disseminated through social media. On average, more than 6 vehicles freely moving around through on a daily basis. Rest assured you, no single local resident, no humanitarian or civil vehicles was denied by eco-activists. This is why, unlike the manipulation and disinformation spread by Armenian officials, no so-called humanitarian catastrophe or ethnic cleansing occurred for the last 75 days. Just because any allegation on blockade and subsequently humanitarian catastrophe is simply false, null, and void. Just yesterday, International Court of Justice rejected the Armenian request to cease its alleged orchestration and support of the protests against Azerbaijan, and it is once more proof that there is no restriction and there is simply a protest against illegal use of the mines in the area of temporarily deployed Russian peacekeepers. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Nick Smith from the United Kingdom, followed by Mr. Vladimir Zhabarov from Russia. Mr. Smith, you have the floor for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, colleagues. Ukraine's post-Soviet journey has been shaped by its struggle for independence, democracy, and cultural identity. Yet Putin's imperialism tries to crush Ukrainian self-determination. He peddles a one people narrative. And on this basis, Putin justifies his full-scale assault on Ukrainian sovereignty. From Bucha to Bakhmut, the Russian army commits crimes against humanity. There are reports of Russian soldiers marching civilians to torture and execution. Then there is evidence of rape being used as an instrument of war. One war crime investigation unit found a victim of just 4 years old. With this violence comes destruction of infrastructure of the economy. Recent World Bank and ILO figures estimate that more than 30% of Ukraine's population has been displaced. 5 million people have lost their jobs. Russia must pay reparations for the death and destruction they have caused. But how? First, by tapping into Russian foreign reserves. Around 330 billion euros is currently held across several European and American countries. Imagine, Chair, what could be done if this was redirected for Ukraine's reconstruction. Then there is a foreign-held oligarchic wealth. These financial sharks must be netted. Now, our parliament has debated how this must be done. This is crucial. Russia and its oligarchs must pay the price for its brutality. It must rebuild what it has destroyed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Vladimir Zhabarov from Russia, followed by Mr. Leonid Slutsky from Russia. Mr. Zhabarov, you have the floor for 2 minutes.
С горечью следим за тем, как отдельные члены парламентской ассамблеи ОБСЕ при постыдной поддержке ее председателя пытаются превратить некогда эффективный механизм межпарламентской дипломатии в инструмент тоталитарного навязывания лжи в отношении России и Беларуси. Кстати, мы очень рады, что неонацисты также выходят из зала. Спасибо, что очистите атмосферу. Мы твердо убеждены, что для установления прочного мира в Европе и преодоления текущих проблем в мировой экономике необходимо устранить угрозы безопасности со стороны нынешних украинских властей. Это возможно лишь посредством демилитаризации и денацификации Украины, что является одной из целей проводимой Россией специальной военной операции. И наоборот, сохранение военной, экономической и политической поддержки Киева в его продолжающихся усилиях по уничтожению инакомыслия, его стремление нанести урон безопасности Российской Федерации ведет к затягиванию и дальнейшей эскалации конфликта. Мне стыдно было слушать некоторых представителей, которые в своих выступлениях говорят «Слава Украине!» или всегда хлопают. Вы знаете, что это напоминает? В свое время вот ваши предшественники также зиговали Адольфу Гитлеру, говорили «Хай Гитлер», а потом вместе с частями вермахта пришли на территорию моей страны, а потом освободили вас от неонацизма. Все в истории повторяется, к сожалению. А что касается американской делегации, прежде чем судить нас, нашего президента, пусть расскажут своим европейским союзникам, как они взрывали Северный поток-1 и 2, как наносили урон своим прямым союзникам, я имею в виду прежде всего Германию. И последнее. Вы знаете, можно и хлопать, захлопывать, выходить, но правду не задушишь. Россия победит, успокойтесь.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Leonid Slutsky, followed by Mr. Andrei Savinik from Belarus. Mr. Slutsky, you have the floor for 2 minutes.
Спасибо, господин председатель. Уважаемые коллеги, хочу ответить Стиву Коэну. Никто в России не находится под гнетом Путина. Я являюсь руководителем крупнейшей оппозиционной политической партии. Нас 350 тысяч человек, членов партии ЛДПР. Сегодня все политические силы в России объединяются вокруг президента и в борьбе с нацизмом, который в мировую архитектуру привносит Украина, марионеточный режим, движимый теми, кто сегодня хочет реставрации нацистского режима. Сегодня на Украине сосредоточено огромное количество летального оружия. Сегодня те, кто поставляет это летальное оружие, хотят действительно разрушения, смерти и реставрации нацизма, который сегодня Россия говорит решительно нет. Мы будем дальше отодвигать границу соприкосновения с вооруженными силами Украины, тем более, чем больше будет поставляться коллективным Западом летального оружия на территорию Украины. Сегодня звучат невероятные обвинения в адрес России, ничего не имеющего общего с реалиями. Россия – организация, призванная решать конфликты. И мы сегодня должны сказать решительное «нет» тем, кто требует подавления России. Мы сегодня готовы к диалогу, к переговорам. Поэтому мы находимся в этом зале и не дадим возможности ставить с ног на голову реальную ситуацию. Мы за мир и всех сегодня поздравляем, кто относится к русскому миру, к русской цивилизации с Днем Защитника Отечества. Спасибо.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes our last speaker, Mr. Andrei Savinik from Belarus. You are recognized for 2 minutes.
Я хотел бы заявить, что прологом к специальной военной операции, которая сегодня проходит на Украине, стало расширение НАТО на восток, которое сопровождалось размещением наступательных вооружений. Сегодня более 30 тысяч солдат НАТО, вооруженных наступательным оружием, сконцентрировано вблизи границ Беларуси. В Беларуси также хорошо помнят массированные бомбардировки авиацией НАТО мирных сербских городов. Я не знаю, как еще можно охарактеризовать память, которая работает по принципу «здесь помню, а здесь не помню». Я уверен, что такая память не поможет урегулированию думать о котором предлагает председатель Национального совета Австрии Вольфганг Субботка. В этой связи заявления о том, что наш регион сползает в неизвестность, должны как минимум сопровождаться признанием о том, что положения Хельсинского документа методично уничтожаются уже несколько десятилетий. Как можно апеллировать к положениям Хельсинского документа, если страны Запада, прежде всего страны НАТО, не хотят соблюдать его краеугольный камень, связанный с безопасностью? Нельзя обеспечивать свою безопасность в ущерб безопасности соседа. От себя еще добавлю, что нельзя также маскировать свои агрессивные планы рассуждениями о безопасности. И особенно алогичным выглядит заявление британского депутата, который предложил исключить Беларусь и Россию из этой организации. Неужели вы настолько игнорируете логику, что не понимаете, что уход этих двух стран будет в реальности означать прекращение любого смысла для этой организации? Вы в конце концов всегда можете проводить свои междусобойчики в штаб-квартире НАТО. Благодарю за внимание.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we have managed to get 32 speakers through in the time allotted. Thank you for your cooperation and respect to one another by following the 2-minute time limit. That leaves us time for responses from our speakers. I'd like to offer them an opportunity to respond very briefly to any points they may have heard in the general debate. We'd welcome 1-minute interventions each. And first, I will recognize Ambassador Urila and then Ambassador Benson. So you're recognized.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Chair. I think that I would maybe just mention that I very much appreciate those delegates who were highlighting many of the important issues and needs of the Ukrainian people that I already mentioned that we are able to address through our programmatic support in Ukraine. And in the interest of time, I did not go into any detail on the projects, but I think that we are really doing our utmost to support the country as I mentioned, as very much wished for by a great number of participating states. And so this is where I think the work of the most valuable work that we can do is right now, and looking ahead, depending on when it might be appropriate to consider various further activities by the OSCE in support of Ukraine. But of course, also depending on the political will of the participating states, I think we do have opportunities in our toolbox also taking into account lessons learned, not least from the SMM, that can be explored. But I would right now refrain from predicting when and what might be possible, as we indeed cannot predict the future. But I thank very much for inviting me to be part of this discussion today.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Uriola. Now recognize Ambassador Benson, if you'd like to respond.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Well, despite differences and different messages that we could hear today, I'm glad to hear there is no lack of consensus to safeguard the OSCE relevance in the future and to maintain and strengthen its capacity to act. Even some confidence and security building measures looks non-applicable in today's circumstances. We see no other way forward than to keep alive the platform for keeping each other accountable. As FSC Chair, Bosnia-Herzegovina will do everything to contribute this with inclusive and engaging approach to all 57 participating states. I'm also glad that some parliamentarians reiterated my words of need to shift from war to peace narrative. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for this opportunity.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'll now recognize Ambassador Stoyan, if you'd like to respond.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'll be very short. I want to thank all the parliamentarians for their comments, and we will take their views into account in the activity of our committee. One general overall comment I want to make: I'm really positively surprised by the fact that the views expressed here in this room and also on the governmental side in the Security Committee are the same. And when we are speaking about the biggest crisis that we are confronting with right now, and there is an overwhelming majority, except two countries or representatives of two countries, either parliamentarians or on the governmental side, that are isolated. And I'm glad to see that also the thinking in this room is that we need to focus our activities on the crisis that has been provoked by the war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine, and we will continue to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And as we say in America, last but not least, Ambassador Dramanov, give you an opportunity to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like just to remind you that it was exactly 30 years ago when first High Commission on National Minorities was appointed, and the office in The Hague was opened. Unfortunately, during these 30 years, tensions related to national minority issues have remained contributing factors in conflict and war. So, and consequently, confrontation continues to prevail across the OSCE region. And that's why I again calling for refraining from any kind of inflammatory and populistic rhetoric when you are also addressing issues related to national minorities in your countries. Sadly, often minorities are presented as a national security threat in political discourse. And I would like just to remind you that we are an organization of 57 participating states. Every state, and we should understand, is different in its democratic and socio-economic development, and understandably inclined to defend its own national interests. Nevertheless, we need to be united in our common vision and goals of strengthening cooperation and security in the whole of OSCE region, and I'm thankful to those of you who raised this issue. This can be done by designing, in my language, OSCE, HCNM's language, inclusive policies in which the interests of all people are given due attention, and my institution is, I repeat, at your disposal to assist with you. Saying honestly, definitions are of secondary importance for me. What is important and significant is the interests of, as I am repeating maybe for the third or fourth time, interests of all people, be then representatives of ethnic or linguistic minorities for that matter. And I'm thankful to my Kyrgyz brother for such a warm welcoming. And of course, I join my voice to all those condolences to the people of Turkey, and to all our sisters and brothers there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Colleagues, we now move to our final item on the agenda today. We did not receive any notification of any other business, so I will conclude that item and move to my closing remarks, which are, colleagues, thank you. This was a vigorous debate. I think that by respecting each other and our time limits, we were able to get 32 speakers done, which has got to be a record somewhere. But more importantly, I think we sent a message loud and clear that this organization stands firmly with the people of Ukraine and against the aggression from Russia. I also want to take a moment to thank our staff, incredible staff of the Secretariat who support us, and this work would not be possible without them. Thank you to all the staff, particularly to our procedural advisor and to Manu here who propped me up during this meeting. I also want to thank our interpreters for the great work they do to make this meeting possible. Our committee will next meet during our annual session in Vancouver in July. I now declare the 2023 winter meeting of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly General Committee on Political Affairs and Security is now closed. All right, piece of cake. Thank you.